Cool. So if everyone feels comfortable with those guidelines, we just ask that you keep them in mind as we're going about the next hour and a half. They're also available on our website under the resources tab if you want them in front of you. Otherwise, I think we're about ready to hand it over to Carmela, Tara, and Dominique.
Hi, ladies. We've been hanging out a lot. So my name is Carmela Glenn, and I am a certified peer specialist, a certified peer specialist trainer. And in my day job, I am the coordinator of Just Bakery. I work for Justine, formerly known as Madison Area Urban Ministry. And Just Bakery is an employment training program here in the Madison area for those with barriers to employment. So that's my introduction. Pleasure to have all of you here. Thanks. One of you want to go next? Dominique?
Hello, everyone. So my name is Dominique Christian. I am a certified peer support specialist looking to become a certified peer trainer in these next upcoming months. And in the daytime, I am a full-time supervisor to case managers who provide housing supportive services. In addition to that, I am currently attending graduate school at the University of Madison, obtaining my social work degree. So you can imagine how interesting my life is trying to put on social work hat on this side of things and then wear my peer support hat in the world of peer support services. So I intern at the Meriter Hospital in the Behavioral Supportive Services Department. So sometimes I do see overlap when it comes to peers here, and then also clients that we work with at the Road Home Dane County. I do look forward to joining this community, being part of this community, and just learning from each and every one of you. Thank you so much for being here with us today to learn more about culture, power, and privilege.
Right, thank you. All right, my name is Tara Wilhelmy. Lots of familiar names, and for those of you I haven't met yet, looking forward to getting to know you. I am a certified peer support specialist here in Wisconsin. I'm also one of the new trainees in the trainer program. Is that the right way to say it? So I'm also the founder of EATO, which stands for Each One Teach One. It's EOTO. Comes from the concept that when we learn better, it's our duty to teach others, to share that knowledge. For me, peer support is a pathway for my community, and I'm highly invested in supporting, training, and helping to find employment for specifically other peers of color. I'm really excited about being here, and I think we can just go ahead and jump into it. As you who were here a little bit earlier heard Carmela kind of talk about the perspective that we decided to take, I want to just start out with what we're going to call our disclaimer, and that is that we acknowledge that there are several identities that experience oppression and fall victim to what we call the isms. And so we understand that culture, power, and privilege show up in gender, ability, class, age, and many other places. But today, we wanted to spend our time with you as three women of color, specifically Black women, talking to you about our life, our experience as Black women in our culture. All right, and that's going to lead us right into the first topic. We're going to talk just a little bit about culture. And so the basic foundation of culture is this definition: the sum of attitudes, customs, and beliefs that distinguishes one group of people from another. Britton, can you go ahead and play the video that we shared? We're going to share a video with you. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of emotional response. And I want to also just kind of start by saying this work that we're doing together today starts with the understanding that not only do we have to come into the space like Tim talked about in the expectations, thinking about the impact and not just the intention, but also being ready to feel a little bit uncomfortable. And so I ask each person to sit with that discomfort, and later we'll ask you to be reflective about where some of that might come from. All right, go ahead, Britton, if you can share that video with us.
You're muted, Britton.
We're all hearing political ads as well. So let me just share this.
Do not let them take away your
My
democracy.
apologies. This isn't part of it. That wasn't part of it. There.
Racial trauma isn't just something that Black and Brown Americans experience regularly. It's something health experts say they're born into.
What makes it bad is how you experience it.
Similar to PTSD, racial trauma or race-based traumatic stress is the collective effect racism has on an individual's mental and physical health. It can be from major experiences like workplace discrimination or hate crimes, or it can be the result of an accumulation of many small indignities called microaggressions, or system or institutions that enforce structural oppression.
There was a national survey done by the American Psychological Association, and about 25% of all African Americans, 30% of all Native Americans report at least one of those experiences at least once a week.
The APA says not only do Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian American people significantly suffer from racial trauma, but that it can also compound with additional oppression based on gender or sexual orientation.
It depends on the intensity and the frequency of how often you experience racism or how severe the event is, but you might start with just race-based stress. So something will be racist and you'll be exposed to it and you'll feel stress. But racial trauma is really when it has those long-term effects. It really sticks with you.
Immediate symptoms can include increased heart rate or blood pressure, heightened cortisol levels, sweating, or tension in the body. Long-term chronic exhaustion and fatigue are among the most common symptoms.
Just sadness, underlying or overt anger, even thinking differently about yourself. So sometimes believing or starting to endorse those stereotypes that people might have about your racial group. If you're experiencing racial trauma, you might have some of that internalized racism.
Increased hypervigilance, the having the nightmares or flashbacks, avoidance of situations where they may, perceive it as threatening. All of those are consistent with what we find in race-related stress and PTSD. So there's a lot of overlap.
Kind of, bouncing back and forth between that and none, and never really feeling safe and socially connected and supported. And that also affects your brain and how your brain develops.
America's healthcare system impacts racial trauma too, making it more difficult not only to find help, but someone who understands a patient's experience. A 2015 study found that in the US, 86% of psychologists were white, 5% were Asian, 5% were Hispanic, 4% were Black. Meanwhile, some of the experts we spoke to are setting out to help. Dr. Candace Nicole Hargens released Black Lives Matter meditations for racial trauma victims and white allies.
Black Lives Matter.
Therapist Kelly Baker has helped organize Facebook Live videos with her local NAACP branch where anyone can connect to learn more about racial trauma. She's included sharing her own experiences.
I don't think you can say that there was ever a time for me when I did not, that I was never exposed to racism. When I think about my family, my mom, my grandmother, and the things that my mother experienced that were clearly racist definitely affected how she parented her children.
What can be done to respond to racial trauma? Dr. Erlanger Turner tells Newsy adding an official diagnosis of racial trauma to the DSM-5, an encyclopedia of sorts for mental health professionals, is not the solution. He suggests racial trauma's existence is something everyone should be aware of, especially healthcare providers and policymakers.
If you are white, you do need to make sure that you try to understand that person's experience, that you provide some sense of solidarity, that you don't apologize. I think people oftentimes want to apologize in these situations, and that's really not helpful. We need solutions. And so I think that is one of those things that we have to do better and make sure that we take ownership.
Lindsay Thies, Newsy, Denver.
All right. So you might be asking, after I talked about culture, why would I share this video that talks about racial fatigue? And kind of going back to something Carmela had shared about the trigger, the feelings that came up as we worked on putting this together for you today. And we talked about what our culture is and what others perceive Black culture to be. And sadly, right now, our culture, or what consumes us, if we go back to that sum of attitudes, customs, and beliefs, they're all bogged down in this racial fatigue and all of these things that have been from the outside pressed upon us for so many years, that they show up in every single facet of our lives. Today, we're really talking more about how it shows up in direct service and support of our peers in our professional lives. But it's something that we want to make sure that we emphasize throughout this, that people of color carry with them in every situation. There's this dynamic around our culture. And so that takes us to where does this, moving from the concept of culture to race. So race, we believe, or I believe personally, is a social construct, which means it's an idea that has been constructed in order to bring some form of understanding or hierarchy, for us to put people into boxes, right? It's this notion that divides people into groups, and that unfortunately we assign superiority and inferiority. So there's this continuum of power, this continuum of race, color, gender, as we talked about, it goes into all these places. And so when you have the intersections of all those things, then you have these constructs that are holding you down, these issues of culture that instead of being celebrated, become, hateful to say, almost like a burden, right? We carry around these feelings. And so understanding how those experiences and those things shape our existence daily, and how we show up and how we're able to receive support, and then thinking about what the face of our workforce here in Wisconsin looks like, and who's really showing up in those spaces, understanding culture or caring and sharing culture with us, that when we show up needing the support, reaching out for a peer to support us and to walk with us on our path to way to recovery, how much of that authentic connection is there? How many of us feel like we can really man that bridge, hold that space? I think that this is about the point where I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic, per se, over to Carmela. No, I'm sorry, it's to Dominique. Keeping track of the concept of our time. There's more for us to kind of unpack there, but this is really just a touch point. Later on, we're going to go over some questions with you, and we're going to open things up to questions for you.
So hello, everyone. I'm going to cover the concept of power. Power in the way that we provide services to our peers and the way that we interact with one another as professionals. So social influence and or control are concepts that refer to the means through which people behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and the way that we appear are regulated in social systems. This is achieved primarily through socialization, behavior, and emotions by others through conformity. The effect on one's opinion, socialization, peer pressure, and leadership and persuasion. Through this, individuals identify with social system norms and values, which lead to them acquiring a stake in the maintenance of those norms and values. This ability to influence the behavior of others is defined by power. So disparities in power between peer specialists and the peer can result in entrenchment of discrimination, oppression, and non-involvement in practice. I hope to explore the significance of power relations in communication and peer-to-peer work and its contributions to the discrimination and oppression, and ways in which this can be challenged, including enhanced participation and involvement, especially through effective communication. So the way that I would define power is often used interchangeably with authority, which is perceived as legitimate by the social structure, the pattern social arrangements presented in society by both emerge from and determine the actions of individuals. And I think it is essential that we as peer specialists understand the effects of power within those structures in which they work in our practice. Examining power from a sociological standpoint is concerned with the discovery and interpretation of relative strengths, whether stable or subjective to change, equal or unequal. So we know that power is not innate. Power can be granted to others. It can also be acquired through possession or control of a form of power. So there are 5 specific types of power that I'm going to try to cover, and that is legitimate power, which is the formal authority delegated to a holder of a position. Then you have expert power, which is the authority derived from a particular skills or expertise. We also we can also see coercive power come up, which is the capacity for the application of negative influences, such as threats and punishment. Then you also have the reward power, which is one's ability to offer rewards and therefore to wield their power over the subjects, which in this particular case could be our peers. And then there's referent power, which is the ability of the power wielder to attract others and build loyalty. So there was a question that I posed, but I think I'll just drop that in the chat box for the sake of time. But I wanted to cover like multi-level power dynamics. And so peer specialists can exercise power and not be aware of the wielded power. It is essential to examine the position of peer specialists as it may affect what we see as our role within the people that we serve. Certified peers who are overreactive or controlling, passive, some could be seen as detached, they lack in cultural sensitivity, are unable to allow their peer to be the expert, and are not mentally available to empower people that they serve. And this will show up at different levels within the power dynamics. Ways that multi-level power dynamics could happen could be where it could show up when you're talking about certified peer support specialists to Black peers, certified peer support specialists working with any peer in general. It could come up, or it can show up in seasoned certified peer support specialists to new certified peer support workers. And you'll see those derived from the training environment, so that co-facilitation of our trainings that we host. And then there is the supervisor to certified peer support specialist worker, sort of power dynamic that could happen. So power may show up simply because we are working for both the service user and the good of society overall. This can result in tensions between loyalties to service users and to service agencies or public authorities. We have to be mindful of our biases, which could lead to controlling and directing the course of action, often in one-dimensional framework, which forces our peers into a position of feeling powerless. And so speaking for myself, just recognizing that we live in a society where social environments protect and insulate specifically, or particularly white women, I should say, from race-based stress. There's an exception of racial comfort and providing reassurance that white people can't tolerate the racial stress that comes with having discussions centered around racism and how we do this work that we do in the world of peer support. So just asking that you understand and recognize implicit racial, ethnic bias among just like systems, so healthcare professionals, the criminal justice system, the child protective service system, and all of those things, and how it influences potential healthcare outcomes. So then also, white providers must recognize that absence of cultural humility when working with Black service users, that power may show up when there is judgment regarding the way Black people parent, or the way that we spend our earned income, our beliefs about the mental health system, discussing why someone chooses to use as opposed to working towards sobriety. And so through my research, I did find a study where they reviewed bias scores among 15 different studies, and found that 10 out of the 15 studies showed significant numbers where Black program participants often perceived poor treatment in domains such as patient-centeredness, contextual knowledge of that particular individual, and then participant to provider communication from providers who demonstrated implicit bias against Black people. So all of this to say that, Black people really don't have an opportunity to turn a deaf ear to a situation, so to speak. So when we talk about how supervisors within agencies or training institutions or private practices routinely encourage speaking openly about the work that we do as peer support specialists or certified peer support specialists, our countertransference reactions, attitudes, judgments, and understanding of the best way to proceed. This is a supervisor's attempt to build trusting relationships with us and also to build rapport. But recognizing that supervisors also oversee the care that the peers, client, are receiving and also monitors the peers' development as a specialist. So supervisors have the power to intervene on behalf of peers, perhaps by suggesting that maybe that particular peer should be transferred to a different service provider because they don't feel that things are going well based off the information that we provide. And then they also have the power to influence or even derail the trainee's professional career based on an evaluation of the peer's work. And just checking in for time. How am I doing? Have I run over? Okay, so for the sake of time, I am going to pass the mic to Carmela.
Thank you, Dominique. Welcome, everybody. So my subject is around privilege, and everybody in this room should be comfortable with starting here, right? This is that place that we have started the conversation around culture and power and racism and systematic racism. Privilege is the beginning, not the end of understanding culture. Power and privilege and systematic racism. It is the conversation we have to get people comfortable to understand where they sit on the totem pole of justice. To inform all of you, Black women sit on the bottom. That is the privilege scale. If you look at it, it tends to fall that way if you guys have done privilege trainings in your conversation. But it's the conversation that we can all have. Today it will be centered around Blackness and Black women in specific. And so one of the areas that we just want to talk about is this disconnection versus inescapable racial social justice stress that we all sit in. And this came up so much with us when we were talking about putting this together, as some of you might have heard me talking about trauma and toxic stress. That is to say, stress that is powerful, frequent, or underlying and largely unmediated by adult support are not, of course, problems limited to girls and women, but they often stem from experiences that occur disappropriately in the lives of girls and girls of women in color in particular. And so when we talk about privilege, there's this idea of where we all sit on it. And as Black women, when we talk about the chronic stress that we live in, there's this whole idea of chronic stress that we live in, this space of never having a place to unpack. I found so many articles about privilege and resiliency and all of these subjects around it. And one around chronic stress was, so for Black women, there's this nature versus nurture space. In our homes, we wear our Blackness and carry it around with us, and we still have this stress of wearing it all of the time. Yet there's this nature space that we go into, and it's the community setting where we carry not only the things of our color and being the woman who carry in our households, but also then you go into the community and we carry that, plus we carry the things of racism and patriarchy. So the success, even though Black women tend to be, it's the biggest group of working, but we tend to be the lowest paid, so we don't build wealth. So the privilege of building wealth behind of our education does not exist. We're one of the largest growing workforces, yet we all know the privilege of you look in Madison in particular, Milwaukee too, but there is more in Milwaukee, of this space of the privilege of running companies, which is why I love Miss Tara over there. And we're not leading them. And then there's this space around privilege with Black women of this duality that we live in, right? This strong, resilient Black woman, the women that carry it, the women that decide elections, the people that decide elections. Yet in 2014, it had been 15 years since a woman had been elected to Senate, right? We decide elections, but as of 2014, there hadn't been someone who had been elected to Senate. We're not represented in the community as much as we fight for our communities. And so there's this duality. And the interesting thing I found when I was doing research is if you look up resiliency, there's all of these beautiful articles. And Tim and I have actually had this conversation lots of time. And a lot of the articles are around like the ACEs, right? The resiliency thing started coming up because of the ACEs and how they balance out. And so what I found was all of these great articles about resiliency and da-da-da-da. Then you put in Black women, I couldn't find anything. You can't find a space. According to statistics in the community and all of these things, it was still at the bottom of the totem pole. Oh, ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience questionnaire. It is 10 questions in regards to, I just assumed because I always do it in my peer trainings. It is 10 questions wrapped around domestic violence. Have your parents struggled with alcoholism? Was there mental health? Had someone been to prison? Did you feel loved? And as someone who's a 10 out of 10, I remember going to Tim, talking to him about this, like, whoa, why am I? It says a 4, you should be broken, and this. And Tim showed me this resiliency thing, which balanced out. But when you go look it up for Black women, we still say, it still talks about heart disease and chronic stress and cancer, and I couldn't find anything. I found one very cool study done, and it was published in the Washington Post, about strong Black women are a cultural icon, born of Black women's resilience in the face of systematic oppression that has dismantled families and made economic stability a formidable challenge. She is self-sufficient and self-sacrificing. She is a provider, caretaker, homemaker, and is often suffering. And we get put on this pedestal of this resilient, yet at the same time, that's our counter place, right? This space of our resiliency coming back to bite us often because we just do it because we haven't had much of a choice if you look historically. And so that duality is it resilience, and where do we go be vulnerable? And is that resilience then held against us? And is that resiliency used to be able to talk to say, oh, you're so strong and you got this? So that duality that we live in of having to sometimes someone saying, oh, you're so strong and you've got this and da 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 da, and next thing you know, we're caretaking and hugging and putting our arms around someone so they feel more comfortable dealing with our strength and this thing, this duality world we live in. And so that's that privileged place that we don't get to sit in that often. The last one I wanted to kind of touch on, and then we want to kind of turn it over to you guys, is a space to be vulnerable. There are many places that we feel safe. I wrote something I just want to read to you guys because I was thinking of this yesterday as I went to go have acupuncture done, and I felt so safe, and I started tearing up when I was talking to my acupuncturist because I'm safe there. She understands me. I often carry this image of this little person in armor every time I'm about to walk out the door. She's ready to protect me from what I will hear on a daily basis from the uneducated mind of my community. It's like this little person that's ready to bat off the things that I have to hear. What is at first confusing, but yet makes perfect sense, is that although we appear sassy and in control, intimidating, Black women are often talked about, right? The strong Black women taking charge and needing no help from anyone. This American story is consistent with the tale of us being invisible. We are often misjudged. Our resiliency isn't thought through. It's an integral part of our community, yet it sets us apart in some way. We have survived, thrived, and led in spite of obstacles that have often kept us vulnerable in terms of those terms seldom being used to describe us. So I want to give time for this. There was also a report I had that our labor participation is far different than the idea of the welfare queen, right? That stereotype that kind of follows us around. However, because of pay disadvantages that started long ago, Black women over the age of 65 have the lowest household income in any group. Labor legislation that brought a measure of economic justice to other groups did not cover domestic service and other limited job opportunities to African American women that we often held. So with that around privilege and understanding sometimes where we sit and sometimes a little bit about us and our vulnerabilities and our resiliency and the truth of where we sit on a totem pole, but also where we sit within our community. I just wanted to share a little bit about that with you guys. I know the chat has been going off. I don't know if it's questions. One other thing I wanted to come back to just really quick about culture, and Tara and Dominique talked about this, is I would like to know if anybody could tell me what is Black culture. Do we have one? That's not wielded in slavery? Who are we? And with that, I think we should open it up if people have questions. So I would like that if anybody does have an idea, and I know that there has been spaces that people have dug into and around us being here first and us and Moors and all of that, but what is African American culture?
I'm wondering, Carmela, Dominique, and Tara, if in addition to this question being posed to the group, if you three might be able to speak a little bit more on how what you've just talked about might show up specifically for non-Black certified peer specialists providing services.
Yes.
And how that looks kind of in the professional field.
So I had those with some questions. I was going to kind of round that around too. We had posed some questions. I wanted to know for peers working with who are non-people of color, how do we handle the cultural differences? What are some of the things we have worked on around peer support? How do we do the non-people of color? What have we done specifically? I know there's been a training that Tim has offered through our program, but what are some of the things that have been done to make sure that culturally you are sensitive around power? Dominique covered that well, around culture and around privilege for those that you are working with that are people of color. Is that okay, Tim, to ask that question? All right. Does anybody want to open a mic up? We could just have a conversation. You can put it in the chat if you're more comfortable, but we could also just have a conversation.
I'm going to be brave, and I'm going to, sorry, Carmela, I'm going to come from an opposite direction only because I want to kickstart this conversation a little. For me as a Black peer, something that I find myself having to do when I'm communicating with non-Black peers is sometimes what we just talked about, this constant thing that we carry with us. Sometimes it puts me in this space as I'm helping or listening to them process trauma. There's this comparative thing that happens in my brain, right? And this happens whenever anybody's is listening to somebody kind of unpack trauma that and this is a space where you have to forgive me because I won't be using PC words, and I'm going to just put it out there how it feels. And that's like things that don't feel comparable, right? So as I'm listening to somebody who I can see the privilege, can kind of feel it seeping out of them, and then they're talking to me about these things, and putting myself in this space of being able to hold that space and be supportive and show up in this blank space kind of a place, and not carry my own experiences, my own bias into this, right? Because there's these feelings where there's a part of me that automatically goes, oh, honey, if you knew what I just dealt with 5 minutes before I got into this space with you, right? And so how do I hold compassion? And I'm wondering, when I've had experiences with other non-Black or white providers, right, that there's this opposite thing that happens. There's this glorification of my resilience that doesn't get to the fact that of what I'm feeling and what I'm carrying. And so wondering if there's spaces that you can challenge yourself to think about how that has shown up for you. Or maybe this is a time where we get to that direct question, Carmel, and kind of figure out what we have going on in the room about who we work with and who we support. Any feedback on what I just said or what I threw out there?
Ladies.
Yes.
I love you.
Thank you.
I love you. And, you know, I've had different conversations with all of you. And I guess the thing that I'm really trying to do is to hear and to really look at myself, my truth, what that thing that you just talked about, that piece that comes up to me that wants to defend. I love you. I care about you. I want to know. And I don't want to be left out, like, which seems crazy because we're talking about power, right? We're talking about, I'm not left out. I just saw, and I'm just going to be honest, I'm going to be transparent. I just witnessed that Alex G was talking about the Excellence Center for Black people. And it said, this is only for Black people. And I was like, man, I'd want to go there and see see some of the people I love. I want to see you guys. I want to see, right? And it was like this moment of, holy shit, I can't even imagine how many spaces people are not invited in ever, or that you don't get it. You're not just welcome there. You have to be it has to be okay to be requested to come in. Right. And so I have spent the last, and Carmela, you and I have talked, and I've talked to you, Tara, and Dominique, I don't ever get to see your ass, but it's really wonderful to see you today. But for me, it's like I feel like we're in this together, and I still can't understand. I really can't touch what that's like for you, and I want to. And then that part that you said, Carmela, about having to hold someone else while they're crying about the sadness that you're experiencing, that's hard for me because I love you so much, right? I love you. I love the people that led me. Think about Jerome. So as a peer specialist, as just an ally, I don't want to ask what to do, and I want to just witness and be a part of. And I kind of feel like I wish you just say, come along, and I don't want you to have to do extra work, but I want you to say, do this, because I want to help. I want to grow. So I don't know if that answers what you're saying, but yes, all of those feelings come up. And I was raised 15 miles south of Gary. So my response was what I was taught, was indoctrinated into me about what it was like to have a Black person in my neighborhood. Something was wrong. Then I lived in Gary as a white person, and it was like, what? I hated that whole concept, but I also was still raised with those beliefs that the world told me, not what I believed, but it would come up when I didn't like some, if that makes any damn sense.
Thank you, Tamara, first of all, for sharing that. We have had conversations about this, so thank you for sharing that. Here's how I feel personally. I'm not going to speak for Tara or Dominique. I often find myself willing to those who do 50%, right? Like, so when you show up in this space, this is the space that I am open to having the conversation, and that I'm not willing to drag anybody here. I'm not willing to change people's mind any longer. I'm too tired to do that. And if you're still sitting in that space of not understanding, you got work to do, and then you come work with me, and then we'll come do this. But it's true, right? That space. And while we're centering this around Blackness and Black women, we all know as peer support, we go through the training, we get that all along the way. Our biases and our privilege show up in how we see and work with other people, because that's what we're supposed to do. We're asked to tap into empathy and imagine ourselves in that space, right? We've all seen the Brené Brown video where the fox is hugging, the bear's hugging, and literally tap into that. And so what can be done, I believe, wrapped around peer support is really understanding and learning what empathy is. I can't understand, and I'm never going to get, because even though I've walked in these shoes, they're not your shoes. But that doesn't mean that I can't empathize with your trauma and then ask you, which is what we're supposed to do, for you to tell me your truth. And so that's the space where we can do no harm in. That's how you do no harm when you're sitting with that. So that's just my idea behind when it comes to peer support, is it's gonna take tons of empathy, of finding something with yourself to be able to tap into and say, there's people that don't understand me ever about this. Oh, I might not ever understand that, but I can empathize with it.
I do see Cheryl's hand raised.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to take that opportunity to go. The thing that I want to say goes right along with how the conversation has just been going. I obviously, I work in a county where there is very, very few Black people, if that's an okay term with you ladies. And I just want to say, I want to be part of the solution. I want to help in any way I can. I don't have the opportunity to work with as many cultural people, but I have taken lots of multicultural education, and no, I was not in your particular situation. And I would say that it goes back to privilege, but I know exactly what you say when you say, oh, you have no idea what I dealt with 5 minutes ago. And one of the things that I personally experience is someone saying that they're broke, and so I just liken it from there. Like, I start off at ground zero with that person. I may not have learned about their culture, but whatever that they're willing to tell me about their experience, and I have to put it into context, because even if we went through the same type of abuse, it's still on different levels. It's still, they had to go through it underprivileged in inner city, whatever city. And I was in rural Podunk, so it is different. And the first thing that I want to say as a white woman, as a German Irish white woman, is to say, I can't know everything. I can't even begin to know, but I can understand, and I can empathize, and I can learn, and I can be part of the solution, instead of saying, I have nothing to do with that. I want to be proactive in a good way, especially with my peers, but within my community, to try and raise awareness. And absolutely any program of inclusion I'm on board with. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I wanted to to go back just a little, kind of thinking about something you said and reading some of the comments in the chat and thinking about wanting to kind of recenter us a little bit around this concept. It's not so much like, you're right, sure, we could go through exactly the same experience, and the things that make a difference are what we carry into that space, the kind of actual support that's going to be available for us when we go to seek out that support, and then the concepts and the things that are going to come up in that space. And I want to also be clear that when I made the statement about holding this what happened to me a minute ago and fighting that urge, I was hoping that that would act as an example for people to touch into spaces that's happened with them as well. Not to ever to say, we know that trauma is the subjective thing, right? The worst thing that ever happened to me, whether it be nothing to you or phenomenal to you, is still the worst thing that happened to me. And holding that space for every person who's experienced something as that worst thing, no matter what it is, that was still their worst thing, right? So understanding that. And for us, what we want to kind of hold or to have you think about is that when you do encounter Black or other Indigenous people of color, holding this idea of challenging what you think when you go into those spaces. Are you thinking that you don't need to ask somebody about how they're doing because they're resilient and they're strong? Are you thinking that you need to come into that space and go, oh my God, I know today is really hard for you because of what I just saw on the news? And instead walking into those spaces, holding those thoughts to yourself and focusing more on those interpersonal connections, right? How would you ask any person how they're experiencing the world today? Why is there this walking into a space with because I'll be honest, like I'm going to shift just a moment here. The thing that makes me most uncomfortable as a Black woman isn't when somebody asks me a question, whether they ask it in the wrong way, right? It's if they come to me and they care enough to engage in conversation with me, then I'm going to have all this grace for what comes forth, right? Just as I'm going to ask them to have with me, because I'm not an expert on everyone else's culture either, right? We all come into this space of cultures ignorant about ones we haven't experienced or studied. But what happens for me is, like, 2 days ago, standing outside with my kiddos laughing and counting to us, like it got to the point where we were laughing amongst ourselves because that's how we chose to deal with it. How many of the white ladies walking dogs stopped and found a way to discreetly turn and walk away? Right? To make another way around the corner, and recognizing that that's part of me standing outside laughing with my kiddos. And while that might not happen as much in one neighborhood as another, that's an experience I carry. Going into the grocery store and having somebody lean across me and not say, excuse me. Is it because I'm a Black woman? Is it because they don't know how to communicate? Like, there's all these things that I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of microaggressions. But being in a space where you walk into the space with your peer, you hold those things and you remember those things, but you also act in a way that, hey, I'm a person, you're a person, let's have this conversation person to person, and recognizing intent and impact in those spaces. Recognizing that if I don't know, I'm here to learn from you. That gets back to that mutual benefit, right? Maybe that's the piece that I'm not the expert in, but that you can help me to learn in. But being fearless enough to have that conversation, or going out to educate yourself and being in enough situations where you become comfortable enough to have those conversations in those moments so that you can truly be effective. If you're somebody who showed up in this space, which I doubt because you all took time out to come and learn about this, which to me indicates you're open at least to the idea, if not semi already educated, or oftentimes I walk into spaces with women who aren't Black or white, who are not Black or Indigenous, who have this wealth of knowledge, right? And who understand and who've actually done more work on the subject than I have. And so being able to make that connection but hold that space is a trick, and it's a trick that I wanted to explain that I do in the opposite, right? When I'm not stepping into spaces with other Black women who are letting down their guard and telling me it's so good to have somebody who just understands these fundamental pieces, right? And instead going into these spaces where I know that my peer might feel awkward, or when I know that there's things that I don't understand about their culture that I have to ask and inquire. But because I've lived with it, I'm not uncomfortable with asking it. And so the space that we need to get through is also that discomfort. That idea that either we know we hold the privilege so we don't want to talk about it, or we feel that this person is so strong and they get through so much that instead of saying, how can I help you today? How can I be of service? What can I sit with you with? Is this idea of praising you for your strength, right? I'm going to pass it to the ladies, so I feel like I'm on one of those rambling rolls. Y'all know I get on.
No, you
But
ramble,
please,
girl.
Jump in, come on, keep this going. I love it. Those of you who have joined in, I appreciate it. Those of you that are quiet, share a little something in the chat box or speak up. We want to have a conversation.
I do see a few things in the chat that I'm just going to read out real quick.
Please.
I see from Kyle, he said, yes, race just like Tara said, is a socially constructed concept. He learned yesterday in class that there's more difference in races than there is between them. Peer support across cultural lines is mutual feelings through different experiences. From his experience supporting Black men as a white person, when he focused on similarity rather than what is different, allowed for greatly meaningful relationships. Zakia says, Black people have been dehumanized, and that has created such a deficit that one's empathy can only be fathomed. The solution is where the problem lies. And then there is earning the right to walk into a space instead of just stumbling into that space superficially. Thanks, Tara. Education's never finished. Such a jumpstart for me. Thank you. And then Mandy has, as a white woman, when working with Black or other people of color, I ask about their culture if need be. I go into every situation or conversation wanting to learn about you, your feelings. I will never understand someone else's feelings or trauma, but I can be there and be empathetic. If I don't understand and feel I need to ask, or, I'm sorry, this is fighting me, or say, I don't know how that feels, can you share it with me? And I also wanted to just touch on one other thing that I think comes up, that I see coming up very frequently, and that I've talked through with I think Tara and Carmela, is really that difference between discomfort and actual harm. When we talk about race, specifically for white people who often feel demonized and unwilling to engage because they hear in the news people talk about, oh, white people do this, white people do that, and they're like, well, not me. Not me as a white person. As a white passing man, I went through that process too, and was like, I don't do those things, but I do. And really being able to engage in this space right now, I would really hope that the people on this call are willing to recognize the difference between the discomfort they might be experiencing right now, recognizing it's not actual harm, and then leaning into that discomfort to be a part of the conversation that you all really put together. So I'd love to hear from people who are attending kind of a little bit more about their experiences, like you were talking about, Carmela, situations where maybe you felt like you were experiencing either your privilege coming into play, or situations where just different pieces came up for you that you're willing to share with us to experience discomfort and learn and grow together.
Tim, you kind of brought up a subject that we often talk about, which is kind of our mantra in peer support, is do no harm, right? And that's what we believe as peer specialists. So kind of piggybacking off of what Tim said, I think it's just really important that I know, and I prepared these two for this because I've sat in these meetings, and it's not just this one, so I'm gonna let some of you off the hook, but I would hope that some of you could lean in, that I know that sometimes it's hard to feel like you're asking the wrong thing. We want to tell you that we've been doing this work. I have been doing this work for over 15 years, and there isn't a question that I haven't probably been asked already. And so, because here's the thing is, we do want to do no harm, and unless we have educated ourselves. Do you know how I know about Black history and that? Out of go finding it myself. None of us in this room have found it in our education system. None of us have found it unless you have specifically reached outside of your circle of your norms and went and picked up a book and educated, or went to trainings. And we're in 2020 and we're doing a culture training on Black people. And so that's where we're at though, right? And so let's all not make sure we're not here in another 20 years or 40 years or 60 years. And peer support is the model that can change that. We are the change agents. We are the ones that can do this work, not just with our peers, but that duality role that Tim has brought up a lot lately of change agents in our organizations, change agents at the table, change agents to be able to do systematic, so that we're not just healing those that already feel they've been harmed by clinician or corrections, but also the system that they work in. So it would be great, white, bright, and ideally.
I do see Dwayne with his microphone off in case you'd like to chime in, Dwayne. And also there was a question about microaggressions.
Oh, I don't have something about microaggressions. I have something about racial profiling. Okay, I have friends on the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago, and they're black friends. And so I had one guy was studying agriculture, one of his sons, and I had a little farm up in Michigan, and we were so two brothers from the South, 19, and one was 19, one was 21.
You're cutting in and out on this.
And so they're staying at my house. And pardon?
You're cutting in and out, just so you know.
Yeah, I know. My internet's totally screwed up today. So we're
Try turning your camera off, Dwayne. It seems to always work for me when I'm in a training
driving
like
to
this.
town, and it's northern. Pardon?
Try turning your camera off. It seems to open up some bandwidth. Then we can at least hear you.
Okay. So anyways. So then we're driving down, and can you hear me, or am I cutting out? Am I cutting out, or am I good?
You're still cutting out pretty consistently.
Damn it.
Maybe try popping it in the chat if that's possible.
So anyways, the guy, we got pulled over. And then they searched the driver once, and then I'm like, fuck you guys. You're a bunch of fucking redneck fuckers. And these brothers are telling me, Dwayne, calm down, calm down. I'm like, fuck that. This is fucking bullshit. And because these, I mean, it's just bullshit. It was definite profiling. So then they searched the driver and the passenger. Don't search me. Oh, they smelled weed. And I'm like, okay, you smell weed. Is it burnt or is it fresh? What part do you smell? And and so then they searched the guy once and they didn't find anything. So they searched him twice. They searched him twice, and I'm freaking out. And that was one incident. But because of my thing cutting in and out, I can't describe damn thing. Sorry, my internet's totally messed up today. I don't know why. So anyways, I have a lot of experience with it. I've grown up with a lot of men of color, and I see what they go through, and I know when I walk in somewhere and they walk in somewhere, it's a totally different thing. When they walk in up here, it's I just watch everyone's eyes, and they're all looking at them. But I can't describe it anymore.
Thanks for trying. We kind of got the gist of it, that you were fighting for your guys. Thank you, Dwayne. What was the microaggression, Tim?
It was a question, what is the difference between discomfort that doesn't cause harm and microaggressions that do?
For me, I think it depends on the person, right? Like, it's an individual thing that we have to each learn. So that's the thing why I kind of brought up culture, because I always hear people know people from different cultures. And if you're talking about Black people, what culture are you talking about, right? Like, we're Black, we're a race, but I don't know what our culture is yet. We're figuring out. It's that flailing. I had this conversation just reeling. There is a sense of flailing that we feel, or I feel, of where do we lean into when things get rough. There's, I can trace back. So just a really quick, I do these nutrition projects for my program, and I've had so many people from all different kind of race and cultures do them. And every time it's someone who can go back like hundreds and hundreds of years to like Day of the Dead and all the way to their island and all this. And I just like tears comes out of my eyes because I can trace mine back to North Carolina when I was brought over here, my train of that, but then it all kind of dies and it's somewhere in this big continent and country of Ivory Coast and Ghana and some stuff. But within that, what is the food and what is the religion and what is the this? And we haven't dug down far enough in that, right? So we were told to assimilate and go play nice on the playground, and no one else played nice. And so there's this piece of when we talk about culture, what are you talking about? Because it's a very individualized amongst Black people, which is why I feel like we can't be understood for me, because I shouldn't be a representation for all Black people at the table, because the person sitting next to me, they're just like white. That's kind of that privileged place of thinking that because you know one who does it this way, that all of them do that this way. And you have to just, what Tara said, it's gonna be this sitting down with people and not saying the things that you're thinking, and have to get to know people that don't look like you individual, because microaggressions are gonna be different for everyone. Mine are, I got a lot, but someone might not have as many. When I'm doing trainings, it's interesting when I am sitting in the room with men of color, Black men of color, the level of where their comfort level is compared to mine, and want to be known as men. A few of them have said things like, I'm just a man, or not wanting to talk about race and culture, and rightfully so, right? If we want to talk about someone who's seen and afraid in their lives, are right of having to assimilate. But so it's going to be different for everybody. You guys want to chime in on that? How you feel about it? It's an individual base.
Okay.
I was trying to. I didn't see a way that we can raise our hand. Is this kind of like?
You can go ahead. No one else is talking. Go ahead, Anthony.
Go, Anthony. Go.
I definitely want to touch base on what you just said. You know, a lot of times, being an African American male, and especially being a dark-skinned African American male, we are often stereotyped as being angry. So I can just give you a perfect example. Approximately, 2 days ago, Tuesday, I was in the middle of an RTM, and I started bringing up the fact that the peer, all of the appointments that he's been missing, and he's been having a lot of medical problems, and I'm saying, hey, you know, I'm putting a lot of work in, I'm setting up your transportation, and then you're not going to your appointments, and he just got some major kidney dysfunction going on, stage 4 kidney disease, and these doctors are asking for blood work because they want to see how his kidney is functioning, because they can increase his medication. So during the RTM, the peer shut down because nobody liked to be told when they're missing appointments, because I was giving the dates and the times, and he just hung up the phone. So right after that, the therapist and the care coordinator, they felt that my tone wasn't appropriate, and I'm sorry about that. They felt that my tone wasn't appropriate. They felt that my tone wasn't appropriate, but what it was, I was talking with passion, because I really, really care a lot about this peer. I've been working with him a long time, and my voice elevated a little bit because I was saying, hey, you know, we need to get this done. We need this blood work done. I'm concerned about your health. Let's get this done. And right away, I think that if it would have been a Caucasian male speaking in the same tone, that it would not have been looked at as being aggressive or angry. So it's just, and I get that a lot, you know. The agency that I just worked for, my director was an African American male, and I remember he would pull me to the side whenever they would have a board meeting, and he would say that, You know, the other people in the board meeting would say that he was aggressive and angry. And this guy is one of the nicest guys ever, but whenever he would talk with passion and his voice would elevate a little bit, it's looked upon as being aggressive. And he told me that there were Caucasian males in the same meeting that was talking even louder than him, but the people didn't feel intimidated by the Caucasian males, or they didn't feel that the Caucasian males was being angry or aggressive. And like I said, being an African-American male, especially dark-skinned, we are often stereotyped as being aggressive and angry.
Thank you,
Can
Anthony,
I
for bringing
speak
that up.
to?
Yeah.
Can I speak to that? So I just wanted to say, like, recognizing that your experience is your experience, but also to say that I can totally relate to that. Just because I have a loud tone regardless, no matter if I am literally angry or if I'm feeling good, doesn't matter. My tone is loud. It is what it is, right? And so I've learned through life, I don't code switch in a professional setting, nor do I code switch in my personal life. I just don't do it. I do want to say that in spaces such as this, I would like for us to call it for what it is. So when you say Caucasian, Anthony, we are talking about white people. And so just noting that, like, the term like Caucasian sort of comes from like all of the racist sort of terms that were used back in the day. So I just like to call it for what it is. So white or black. So I will say that, you know, when it comes to that, your tone was aggressive and whatnot, it's all based off of white supremacist ideals. This is a society where white supremacy said, you know, oh, this particular tone, which particularly comes from black men, that's aggressive. So we're not going to accept that in our society. So they push it off. I'm passionate as well. And when I'm extremely passionate, my tone gets extremely loud. And it's not to say that I'm upset with my peer or my client, whichever role that I'm operating in, is to say that I feel so deeply about what you're going through and I want you to overcome these things, that my tone is shifting. And it takes for white people that share space with us to start having those conversations with one another and saying, you know, you see that as aggression. Anthony really cares about the people that he provides a service to. So it's not on you to go back to, you know, the therapist or whomever had something to say about your tone. It is on your white counterparts to have these conversations in their smaller circles to address the idea that white supremacy has defined a lot of the terms that we use in professional settings. And it doesn't, a lot of the terms have no cultural humility whatsoever. Also, the way that we communicate with one another. The dominant culture lacks the knowledge needed to understand why we sound the way we sound when we are passionate about what we're passionate about. And that's my piece about passion and tone, because that gets me in trouble all the time, literally. And I'm okay with that, because my response is, you need to understand me. Then that's the work that the therapist needs to do to better understand who you are. And that is absolutely on them. It's not for you to teach someone who you are. They need to be open and welcome to understanding who you are as an individual and why you sound the way you sound when your peer is missing appointments that's related to health, housing, et cetera, et cetera. So I appreciate your experience because I can relate.
Thank
I
you,
see
Dominic.
Mandy with
Thank
their
you
I
hand
was
so
just
up.
much.
about to.
Thank you.
Can I say something right quick?
Wait a minute, Matthew. Mandy's had her hand up for a while. You can go next.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry, I had to fix my computer. So, and you can tell me absolutely if I'm absolutely incorrect, but that's why we're here, is to talk about this stuff. So in my own looking into cultures, different cultures and stuff like that, when I see a black man that's getting a little louder, getting a little more impassioned, to me, because of things I've read, that's more of a like, I don't see it as an anger thing. I see it as a cultural thing, because when I read about culture, and you can't find a ton that's concrete about Black culture, but when I read about it, they say that the speech is very rhythmic and the speech is very passionate. And so when I have taken Black culture courses and things like that, they've taught me that if a Black person gets a little louder, if they, that's the nature of who they are. So do you think part of it is just because people are just uneducated about how we communicate? Does that make sense?
First of all, let me just say, even if you were wrong 100%, everything you just said is exactly what we are asking from every peer in this room. You said you've went to trainings, you said you've read this, you even, and I know you're telling the truth because you said you can't find that much about it. So that was, first of all, that just made me feel really good that you just said that. So thank you for taking the time to go try to find out. I mean, I know it's part of our design of what we're supposed to do, but not everybody does. So first of all, thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there is some, if you look at it historically, there is some stats and publishings about being more staturist. I don't know what I'm trying to say. There is lots of reports done about the fact of elevation of voices and why voices elevate, and across cultures, right? White, Black, green, purple, of what that and why culturally people don't, those that are more quiet and do less talking. There's tons of studies about that. So I think there could be some truth to that. It might not be everybody. If you talk to Tara, Dominique, or me, all of us have stories about, you know, I have them about, you know, I was called a bull in a china shop by my people. I'm told I'm impulsive and I'm intense, just like Dominic. I'm an intense person. I am passionate about what I do. I seen a question over here that Vic had put up that really I wanted to talk about. To me, white folks feeling uncomfortable because they have been told they said something racially insensitive is not the same as microaggression. White folks need to be open to hearing things that they say do cause harm. And that's that education piece that all of us have to kind of have, of finding out and being open to, because I'm going to call people on it. I'm going to say, yeah, no, that's not, I don't like that. But then I'm gonna move on, right? Like, we don't have to live in this and we don't have to stay in that, but we're here to learn. And so if someone corrects you on that, don't let it make you give up on moving forward, because as I've said, and I'm gonna say it about 1,000 more times, we are the change agents, and all of you in this room are gonna be the ones that make the change. And all of you non-people of color, your privilege are gonna get to tables that we're never gonna get to. And if you are educated, and I will call one out for sure that is sitting in this room, and she knows I absolutely love her, which is Marcia, is one of the most educated white women I know about. She can tell you more historical stuff than I can. And so that's where you have to be at, right? You have to find out and educate yourself so that you can be that co-facilitator. You can go to those meetings. You can find out about how you can protect, serve, and support your peers of color.
I know that Mr. Moran had something he wanted to say. I wanted to quick jump in and just say something that just really is weighing on me a little, and that is, I constantly have to assess where white supremacy shows up. And I have to point out that our having this conversation and resting in this comfortable space of black, white, neglects the fact that there's all of these other races and all these other cultures that these dynamics exist amongst. And I know that we're prone to go black, white because white supremacy, going back to this idea of this continuum, places white on one end and black on the other. But having had similar exchanges with people of other cultures and races lets me know that this isn't just a problem that lives between Caucasian, African American, that this expounds past any differences in race and melanin, right? We find that shade colors, different textures of depths of melanin can bring the same aspects out. That was my first thing, is just reminding us of how even mistakenly and easily we fall into some of these things, because that's the culture we are all immersed in. And so the teachings and the things we've been shown and taught and lived lead us in that direction. The other thing is thinking about microaggression. Something I wanted to key into is the microaggression piece is that personal relationship piece. How do I know what the difference is between something I unintendedly said and did that caused harm and what's a microaggression? I'm building a relationship with my peer, and my hope is that within that relationship we can have that conversation. If you don't feel comfortable having that conversation, that's where the work lays. Finding out what's the discomfort. Why is it hard for you to say, I recognize this term. I want to know, has it shown up in our relationship? How do you feel about talking about these things with me? And allowing for that relationship to grow where we can both say, hey, ouch. And this is why ouch, right? And then on a larger level, going back to this white supremacy thought that Black people are not the only people who lost their culture when race was constructed. Every person who considers themselves white comes from a European or some other culture and ethnicity. And I fathom how often when you ask white folks what their ethnic background is, they go, white? And what does that really mean? And so if you wanted to really instruct yourself how to have a conversation about culture with somebody, I would ask you to dig into what your cultural background is, learn about it, and then think about how you'd want to be asked and what reverence you hold for it and what place it holds in your life as you go out into the world, right? The thing for us is that we carry it with us. If you have any ounce of melanin, any broadness of your nose, any of these features that are assigned to African American, African structure, people, we can't escape it. I can't go into a space and act like it doesn't come with me. That doesn't mean that other people don't hold these same cultural pieces that have been taken from them and that need to be respected and understood. That's kind of my final words around it. I did want to comment on the Anthony, whether or not you felt supported by your supervisor in that space, or was that another place that power and culture and privilege showed up for you? Not just the recovery team looking at you in a way, but how did your supervisor, and this isn't something you necessarily have to answer right here, but how was your supervisor able to step into that space and hold it with you? Or did they join that kind of needing to reprimand and talk to you about that? I do want to make sure that Mr. Moran can talk too. So I know we're really short on time.
Can I go now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You know, the one thing nobody ever touched on in this whole conversation is a man named Willie Lynch. You know, do you know who Willie Lynch was? He taught all of us of color how to hate each other. All right? He did it because he was a slave owner, and he came and showed every slave master how to teach us to hate each other. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't consider myself pink, purple, blue, or brown. I consider myself a damn American because where I was born, in America. All right? Now, I got a great-grandfather who ran the north side of Chicago. Look at the last name, M-O-R-A-N, Bugs Moran. A cheap fucking safe petty crack. A cheap safe crack, all right? Who ran, and he got a holiday named after him, St. Valentine's Day. All right? Al Capone thought he killed him, but he did. You see? So, you know, I respect my culture. I respect a whole lot of stuff. But see, in order for us as Blacks to do one thing, first of all, we have to learn how to get back to loving each other and stop hating each other, because you know what? We are our worst fucking enemies. You know, we
so
are our
I
worst
would like
enemies
to, can I
we do. Go ahead.
Matthew, can I say we're running short on time, and I would like to counteract that, though, that when you live within a system, so we always hear about the bad apples, right, in that, the bad apples of this and the bad apples of that. Miss Maritha Adams said this best, and she was talking in a speech I heard.
I know what you're about to say.
It's not the bad apples, it's the bag holding us all. We're not all hating each other. We're living within the bag that's acid, and it's rotten, and it has poisoned all of us. The systems,
True.
it is all built to construct exactly what you're talking about. We don't hate each other. We don't even know each other, but we're supposed to because we're all brown. I don't know you. I mean, you know what I mean? So that's also a stereotype that's put out there to be able to keep us a part of this idea that we don't like each other and that we're coming from each other. Nobody says that about white people who are sitting around when there's crimes committed by white people against white people or all of these things, because most crimes are committed by someone that you know. Most people you don't like look like you. Most people you love look like you. And it's not that we don't like each other. It is more that we are put into this bowl of saying, because we're all brown, we're all supposed to get along. We're different. No one says that about white people. So that's a construct that has been designed to another thing to keep us down. So I just wanted to say that I semi-disagree with that. And the only reason I'm calling Mr. Moran out is he's a former student of mine, so I happen to know him, so I'm comfortable enough to call him out on his stuff. But there was one other, you too. There was someone else too, right? Are we out of time? It's been longer than 10 minutes, Tim.
Zakia had her hand up, but and so we do only have a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure that you all have time for like a closing statement if you want. I have no issue with us going a couple minutes over. If people need to head out, they need to head out, and I do want to make sure we're holding space for Zakia and then having you all wrap up and then calling it a day.
Hey everybody, I'm Zakia. Thank you for giving me a moment. There was some stuff in the chat room that kind of stuck out, and Mr. Moran, he also compiled on top of it, and I agree with Carmela, but there are some issues amongst Black people, and some of that is coming from that white supremacy language that Black people, and one of the comments was of someone's son who was Jamaican did not want to be called Black. And as a Black African-American woman who does not have a culture, I don't know a culture that's not entwined in slavery or what it is. When it comes to music, our clothing, our dance and everything, it's because we overcame that suppression. And there are other ethnicities or culture or whatever, however you want to may look at it, who held on to some of that because of their fight, because of their struggle. So when I had posted in the chat room about the microaggressions opposed to the discomfort, like I can't find her name, but she said, just call it what it is, white and Black. That pink elephant, that is uncomfortable, and it is coming from a place of racism. And when it's pointed out, like, don't be apologetic for it, take your time out, your personal time, and learn about it and educate yourself. So when you come to the table, you have some place to respond from, because you're responding out of questions and you're not jumping into the solution, because the problem lies within the individual who's racist. And if you were born into it, you were born into it. That's a deficit. It's also a character defect. And that's just something I know from being in recovery that I have to accept so I can move on because of my own personal experiences. I've been there and done that. And how I've lived my life has affected how I interact and commingle with my white counterparts. It is what it is, but that's just what I wanted to share, my little piece. And I do get compassionate and automated, and I'm seen as being aggressive, but I'm none of those things. I'm a very loving, caring, intelligent Black woman, and I'm really grateful for this platform. Thank you for giving me a moment to speak.
Thank you so much for speaking. All of that, like, I just want to take all of that. I'm glad we're recording. All of what she said is all truth. For me, wrapping up, I want to say this. Think of educating yourself in this space around culture, power, and privilege as a recovery, right? So for me, who believes and has no problem with even telling her own mother that she has racist tendencies, who has no problem with telling anybody in her family, there's a recovery you can all get on. You can all get on the recovery of understanding and growing and educating yourself, just as you would about drugs and alcohol, just as you would about empathy. You have to spend as much time in that to make change, because if you don't, then you have to realize that that's where you sit. And if that's where you sit, that's where you sit. But think of recovering from racism as you would anything else. So thank you all for being here, and I appreciate Tim and Britton for inviting us.
Yeah, Tara and Dominique, any last thoughts, anything you want to leave us with?
Don't put me behind Carmela, because that was a mic drop. Carmela always dropping a mic over here. You right though. That I'm gonna use that. That's a mantra. Recovery from racism. Okay.
I was gonna say that I challenged the group as a whole to unpack what is often noted as the invisible knapsack. So, you know, checking that white privilege at the door, understanding, being comfortable within your biases and recognizing those things. Working towards not avoiding or rejecting the idea that, you know, white providers are able to decide when they are ready to deal with the realities of others in dialogue. Acknowledging that Black providers have to be ready to respond when we see individual acts of racism, or when we see those acts showing up in invisible systems that is conferring dominance over our group. And just knowing that, like the video had talked about, it's almost like we were born with a duty to always bring our Blackness into any space, no matter how uncomfortable we are. And even today, recognizing that I have been uncomfortable, honestly, throughout this call, just because of the silence that we have allowed into this space, where we all come to openly talk about cultural power and privilege. And that's what I would end my statements with.
Well, we are so appreciative of you all, Tara, Dominique, and Carmela, for stopping by to talk about this topic with us. As we all know, this is something that is so much bigger than just a 90-minute conversation. So like the women just said, please continue to educate yourself. We host these once a month on the 4th Thursday of every month, and we will be back in whatever month is next month, October. So we appreciate you all for stopping by, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all.